Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. We are now going to be focusing on the Central Division. We've got a handful of contributors with the Hockey Writers here to talk about that. We're going to let them introduce themselves, talk about their teams. We're going to cover Chicago, St. Louis, and Minnesota here, but I'm going to let them take care of what they're working on, introduce themselves, let them plug their own social media feeds, whatever they want to, and then we'll talk a little bit about the division as a whole. So we'll start with Brooke. Brooke, you're going to cover Chicago. So let you introduce yourself and where they can find you and read your stuff, and then we'll let you talk about what you're working on.
Yes. So my name is Brooke LoFerno, and I cover the Blackhawks, like you said. You can find me on Twitter. I'm most active on Twitter, so I put my username up on the Zoom screen for you guys all to see. And we also do a podcast, Blackhawks Banter, that is published on Tuesdays on YouTube. So you can find that on the Hockey Writers YouTube page, and that's where you can find all my stuff next to thehockeywriters.com, obviously, for my articles.
So what are you actively talking about when it comes to the Blackhawks and the trade deadline? Are you working on something? Have you been keeping an eye on something? Is there a player or two that we should all be paying attention to as Monday approaches here?
Something that keeps ringing in my mind is Calvin DeHaan. His name, defenseman Calvin DeHaan. He's been, it seems, in the trade rumors a lot the past, actually even the past year, but it seems like the last couple of days his name keeps popping around as a name that should be watched. And I'm also have my eye on Brandon Hagel. I have no clue what they're going to do with him. He's going to carry, I think, a lot of trade value, and I don't know if they're going to want to move him or not. So I have my eye on him for sure too. But those are the two big names, because Fleury, Marc-Andre Fleury, to me is very 50-50. He could go, he could stay, but those two I think are kind of dark horses, Calvin DeHaan and Hagel, that need to be kept an eye on.
Well, Hagel and Fleury were the ones I wanted to specifically ask you about, because they're two very different situations, but somewhat similar in that I think Chicago is willing to move Fleury, but yes, Fleury is probably not necessarily eager to go anywhere. Could be because he's comfortable in Chicago. Could be because he just wants to be choosy about where he goes and whether or not it's across the border or on a team that's going to win. So you said you're 50-50 on Fleury. Do you believe that at this point there's any shot at all he gets moved? Because we've heard about like Toronto and other teams really pressing to see if they can get him to change his mind and maybe make a move. Do you think he does, or do you think he stays put?
A couple weeks ago, I would have said for sure he's going to be moved. And now that we're getting closer to the deadline, I'm thinking he's not going anywhere. I feel like if he was going to be moved, he maybe would have been moved by now. I think we're cutting too close to the wire. And it seems like a lot of teams, according to Elliot Friedman, have kind of gone out of the Fleury race. So to me, actually, I'm thinking he might stay, which will be obviously a big talking point on trade deadline day.
Do you think there's any possibility at all he looks at an extension with Chicago for the offseason? Assuming he stays put, of course.
Yeah, if he stays put, maybe, actually, because he talks very fondly of the Blackhawks, and I do think it's kind of more than the team itself. I obviously understand he's got a wife, he's got kids. It might run a lot deeper than hockey. If they enjoy it here, I think he would. So I actually do think there is a genuine possibility, considering he talks very fondly of the team and he seems to fit in pretty well. The team loves him, the city loves him. So we'll see.
Now, with Brandon Hagel, my take on this whole situation from the outside looking in is that Chicago wants the sun, the moon, and the stars to move him. And why wouldn't you? This is a pretty decent player who should, to me, be part of their equation, whatever it is they choose to do, whether it's retool, rebuild, completely change everything over in Chicago based on the way things have gone in the last little while. He's part of that equation, to me, anyway. Now, there's a lot of people still talking about whether or not he gets moved. So do you think Chicago would be better served to hang on to Brandon Hagel, or could they get such a nice return that it's almost impossible to go, you know what, we have to consider this, and maybe we have to move him?
Do you know what? I go back and forth on this because I love Brandon Hagel myself, and I think he makes sense. Obviously, if you're going through a rebuild, you have to keep young players like that. But I'm also not opposed to seeing what people offer. Sometimes teams get desperate and they do offer, like you said, the sun, the moon, the stars, and they probably will for Hagel. So I'm definitely not opposed to listening. If I'm the general manager, I'm for sure listening, because you never know what you can get about that. Yeah, like I said, I go back and forth, but I'm honestly leaning lately towards trading him. See what you can get out of him, especially if you can get a first round pick. That's the key for Hagel. And it seems like that's what teams are offering. And that to me is key. You can't not take a first round pick for someone like Hagel.
Yeah, well, we're starting to see as the deadline deals start to come in, because it was slow for a while, but now it's starting to move, and there's some people going, and those first round picks are already moving. And so if teams are willing to trade him and he can fetch you one, I could understand why they'd look at it.
Right.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Okay, Mariah, let's go over to you. You cover the Minnesota Wild. What is happening over there? So Bill Guerin's got a decent team. He's got lots that he can work with, but he's got an interesting year next year because of the cap situation that he's put himself in with those buyouts. Anything specific that we should watch for with the Wild?
It's a really hard question because honestly, I didn't before earlier this week, I think is when it happened. I wasn't expecting them to trade anybody like at all. I was kind of expecting them to just sit. I had heard a lot of rumors about the goaltending, but I think they're just kind of in a bad spot right now. They'll be fine. I don't think they need to rush out and try to get a goalie or anything like that. I wasn't expecting Sturm to be gone, but I'm happy they got Jost, and I'm excited to see how he does. Sturm's a good player. He just was really struggling with us, so maybe a change of scenery can be a really good thing for him. Other than that, I really don't expect them to do a lot.
Do you think they could be a sleeper team? Are they one of those teams that, you know, we watch for? We know that they're going to be competitive. They're going to have, you know, decent run at this, but and maybe need one or two pieces to really get themselves in the conversation. But could they be a sleeper team that goes out there and surprises us? Or do you think it's just too much of a risk, considering that they have to be very, very cautious about the money they spend?
I'm gonna say the cautious side. Just listening to Guerin, I've seen a few interviews with Guerin, and even like the biggest thing, like I said, the goaltending they were talking about, and just everyone's been pressuring him, and he's like, you know, I believe in our guys. I think we're gonna be fine. So I really don't expect anything, especially with their money situation with Parisi and Suter stuff. And it's just, I'm really glad I'm not him with the situation, but I mean, they have a good team. They just got to find their way again.
How do you think he's done as a GM so far? I mean, he's pretty gutsy. Like, this is a guy who has not been afraid to make interesting decisions. Like, I can't imagine a first-year GM buying those two guys out. Like, that's just pretty unheard of to me. But so what do you think of the job he's done so far?
To be honest, I love him. I've listened to his interviews a few times. I just love how he sees the team, and I know a lot of people are upset with him because Rossi isn't playing yet, but Boldy's been doing fantastic. And I think it's more of he kind of wants to wait and see with Rossi, and especially with that first year contract stuff that I'm still learning about, but I know Boldy had already burned his first year, so it didn't really matter at that point. But Rossi, I think, was still under the 10 games rule, whatever it is.
Right.
So I know a lot of people are upset about that, but I think it's kind of a wait and see, and we don't want to rush anything either. So I'm happy. I love him, and I'm looking forward to where this team's going to go.
I do want to ask you about Kevin Fiala, though. Here's a guy that a lot of people have talked about. He's been in and out of the rumor mill, maybe moves, maybe doesn't. He's a guy that could be expendable. We don't know what his contract situation is going to look like. And if the Minnesota Wild feel like maybe he's part of the long-term equation. I don't know if you guys can hear it, by the way, my chickens are yelling at me. What do you expect has happened with Fiala there?
Oh boy, I'm hoping they sign him, because I mean, he's at the beginning of the year, I was on the boat of, okay, we need to get rid of him. He needs to go because he wasn't doing what was expected, but he surprised everyone. He had a really slow start, but since January, I believe he's been one of the top scorers on the team. He has like a whole new level to his game right now. I mean, he does still make mistakes more than I'd like, but I'm not in the NHL, so I can't complain too much. But I think he stays. I hope he stays. They'll find some way to keep him, is my hope. But honestly, like I said, I really don't know with the cap space what they're going to be able to do.
Sorry, guys. I was on mute there. I was trying to silence my chickens in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear them or not. Is it fair for me to say that don't expect too much from the Minnesota Wild during the deadline, but maybe expect some moves and some action over the offseason? Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
I would think so. I think that's where he would be Guerin would be most comfortable doing stuff. I don't think he wants to rock the boat too much with the team at this point.
Yeah, and why would you, I guess, right? Like, they're playing pretty good hockey. So it's hard to you don't, even when you are looking to make moves, you got to be cautious of what you bring in and what you send out and how that affects the team, stuff like that. All right, awesome. I appreciate it. Steven, we're going to move on over to you in the St. Louis Blues. Let everybody know where they can find you if you're working on anything specific towards the trade deadline. What's going on in St. Louis?
Yeah. So most common place to see my tweets and stuff is at the podcast account, which is at 2guys1cup on Twitter. I've just written an article at the Hockey Writers talking about 3 kind of under the radar, unexpected moves the Blues could make. And then I'm planning a couple more this week, looking at kind of the new core of the team, because I think they've had a couple guys emerge as sort of untouchable players this year. And then also looking at the Ville Husso situation, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly in a little more detail. So those should be up in the next few days, I'm hoping.
Okay, well, let's do it. Let's talk about the Ville Husso situation. What is happening there? What is something that we all need to know for people that don't follow the St. Louis Blues as closely as you do or others in that area should in this division? What do we need to know about what's going on there?
Yeah, so it's a really fascinating situation. I'll try to boil it down as quick as I can. But essentially, Ville Husso, for those who don't know, was the long-term goalie of the future in St. Louis. For many years, he was looked at as the next big thing, kind of behind Jake Allen, hopefully his eventual successor at the position. And then Jordan Bennington, who'd been basically a write-off in the depths of the system, had his miraculous run. We don't need to cover that anymore, and kind of supplanted him as the long-term guy. But last season, Husso made his debut as Bennington's backup and looked pretty rough and in limited work. And then this year, he's more or less stolen the starting job, at least at the moment. He's been the number one guy. He's had phenomenal numbers. He had, a 2.0, sub 2.0 GAA for most of the season, and has looked really good. The only problem is he's an unrestricted free agent after the season. Jordan Bennington just signed a 6-year, $36 million contract extension last year. So now Doug Armstrong, Blues GM, is kind of between a rock and a hard place. Because, if he keeps Husso, who's going to obviously want a significant raise, then he's looking at one of the most expensive goalie tandems in the league. If he trades Husso, the way Bennington's been playing, he's, leaving him with a huge question mark going into the playoffs. So it's pretty interesting. And just a minute ago, someone sent me a tweet. Frank Saravalli has apparently reported that the Blues have shopped Bennington a little bit to some teams that have goalie issues, hoping to maybe convince them to take the contract of a former Stanley Cup winner. So a lot up in the air there, and a lot of questions left to be answered.
Just going to ask you if you thought that maybe Bennington could be a guy, because there's a common phrase in the NHL that every team is looking for their next Bennington, right? The guy who comes out of nowhere, comes in, has a miraculous run, takes a team, carries them on his back. I mean, every team would love that, but that's pretty rare. It's unlikely that you're going to find that kind of player. So now they're looking at the free agent market or the trade market, and there's not a lot out there either. So if you're St. Louis and you've got Jordan Bennington and you're willing to move Jordan Bennington, and maybe Bennington might be willing to go, could you see a trade before Monday where that happens?
Yeah, I mean, it would be so hard with that contract, because it is $6 million a year. He's not performing well. Teams, even if teams were interested, not everybody has the cap room to do it right now. But it's certainly interesting to hear the report, and it's hard. I'm firmly of the belief that the goaltending position is, pretty much witch doctory. 90% of it. There's the few guys that truly are elite year after year, but everybody else is kind of in a roll of the dice, even under the best of circumstances. So I'm sure that they would love to, free themselves of the contract and have the flexibility to get Husso and probably get him a little cheaper and on shorter term, but I'm not convinced it's very likely that somebody's going to step in and take 5 years of a contract for a goalie who's not performing.
No, that makes sense. Money's always tight, and you got to watch for it, of course. Anything you expect St. Louis to do here before Monday? Is there any kind of moves that we should be watching for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big question mark all season, the big rumor has been left side of defense. They've got a pretty big hole there in their top 4. Marco Scandella has completely fallen off. It was a bad decision to extend him when they did. And the Blues were heavily linked to Ben Sherratt until he moved this week. So there's still discussions of guys like Giordano, guys like Jacob Chikrin. I think, personally speaking, Giordano makes more sense because they, can bring him in for this season and kind of figure out what his contract, if they want to keep him, would be going forward. And, they've got some more flexibility there. Chikrin, if he moves, which I kind of don't expect, is going to cost a fortune. So, I don't know that the Blues really had the assets to swim in that water, but I would think it pretty likely that they make a move on defense before the deadline. As far as any other moves, I wouldn't write off the possibility of trading Husso, just because there are a lot of really good teams right now who seem desperate for a goaltending, and there aren't that many top level options, and kind of that same. Yeah, exactly. I wasn't going to say it, but
I got a team that knows about we could use a goaltender.
And they've been, Elliot Friedman's reported in the past that they're really high on Husso. So, I think it's kind of that similar to the Hagel situation we were talking about, as if somebody comes up and really does come with that first round pick offer or a really high level prospect, especially if you can improve on defense in the same fell swoop, then it's really something you have to look at, because you're probably not going to unload that Bennington contract, and you probably can't afford to pay $10 million for a goalie tandem next season either.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, only Montreal can do that, and we don't know that necessarily works too well.
Yeah, exactly.
Brooke, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to ask you if there's a team in the Central Division that you're watching, if there's somebody outside of Chicago that you're kind of keeping your eyes on. We talked a little bit about Minnesota and St. Louis, but Nashville could be a sleeper team that plays pretty well, that might make a move, but nobody's talking about them. Winnipeg could sell. Colorado's already been bit. Like, who are you sort of looking at?
I'm actually looking at the Predators. Of all the Central Division teams, it seems like the Blackhawks are comfortable making trades with the Preds for whatever reason. It's kind of odd to me, but they have been linked to Calvin DeHaan, and they've also been linked to Ryan Carpenter. So I do think there might be something there between the Hawks and the Preds, but in general, the Preds have been linked to a lot of people lately. And since Steven mentioned the Blues, something tells me there might be a Hawks connection there. If Fleury leaves, I could totally see something like that happening with either Husso or even Bennington. I don't even know if that even makes sense, but I see it. So I actually, the Preds and the Blues for sure is who I got my eye on. They could go plenty of different ways.
Yeah, it's pretty open. Other than Colorado that we know is actively buying, and Arizona that we know is actively selling, everybody in that middle ground there, we're not real sure what's going to go on. Mariah, what about you? Is there a team that you're keeping an eye on outside of the Wild? If they're not going to be that active, is there a team that you're sort of hoping either isn't active because of what it could mean for your team, or you think will be active?
Well, I would say Colorado, but we already made a trade with them. So, but otherwise, Winnipeg, if Winnipeg has had the Wild's number this year just completely, and I know in the last few years we've had to face them in playoffs, so I'm really hoping they don't make any big trades to get anybody else, and the Wild can sneak by them if they would have to face them. So that would be my hopes.
There you go. That makes sense. What about you, Steven? Who are you looking at outside of St. Louis?
Yeah, I think everybody has at least one eye on the Avalanche. They're obviously positioning themselves to make a big move, and there's a lot of talk about Giroux going there. Kind of how much better can they possibly get if you have to beat them to escape the division, presumably. But I'm also looking at the Dallas Stars. I think it's kind of interesting to see where they're at. They sort of made a run there for a minute, and now they've fallen off again. And it'll be interesting to me to see if they really do sell and kind of start a mini rebuild, or if they're kind of trying to hold their chips and wait for the summer. They'll be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, those teams that we don't really know where they sit, and I'm going to include Winnipeg in that, is the ones that intrigue me, because you don't know what they're going to do. And come Monday, they could be one of the busiest teams at the deadline day, because they've just all of a sudden woken up that morning and decided that they're sellers or that they're not, right? So it could be interesting. And that's why I want to watch Winnipeg too, right? Because I have a feeling this team has no idea what their identity is. And if that's the case, who knows what kind of chaos could come out of that. And for those that follow my stuff and the NHL rumors every day, I love chaos. Like, that's just the way that I operate. The more chaos, the better for me. So that's a team that I'm watching. The only person Mariah, I didn't give you a chance to let everybody know where they could follow you. So do you have a Twitter handle or anything like that you want to plug?
I did, just like Brooke. Mine's a little confusing. I go by Holland for everything the hockey writers, but my Twitter is Stark. I got married in October, so my name's the whole thing, but it is up on the screen, and that's where I'm at. So
awesome. Well, for Brooke and Mariah and Steven, myself, Jim, thank you. I appreciate all of you coming on to talk about the Central Division.